So, hello student. So, today we are going to start next module, that module 9, biological transformation. Already in the previous module we talked about chemical transformation, where we mostly talked about incineration process, or you can say the combustion process, detailed about that along with few case studies. Now, we will continue the biological transformation, and there we will first we will start with the composting process. Okay. That is the aerobic decomposition process, and the next module will continue the biological transformation, that will specially onto the anaerobic digestion. Okay. So, this is the functional element. So, we are still onto the fifth functional element, transformation. Now, this lecture will talk about first the definition and phases of composting. See, why I kept this special lecture onto the definition, because when you ask anyone what is the composting process, everyone will say is a decomposition of organic matter, that is called as a composting process, but it is not I think something is true into that, but it is not exactly the only the decomposition of organic waste. So, I will give one proper definition, which I got it from the one textbook. From the source I wrote it here, is somewhat costly book, but you can find online also if possible. And what the definition is given is composting is a biological decomposition. See, remember, is a biological decomposition. So, many times you heard such kind of word like mechanical composting plant. I really never understood why they are calling as a composting plant as a mechanical composting process, is a purely a biological decomposition process. So, mechanical, why they are saying, because there will be some kind of mechanical equipment for the filtering of the compost, because of that only they are calling it, but I think it is not mechanical composting process, it is a biological composting process. So, it is a biological decomposition and stabilization of organic substance. This is also very important word, stabilization, should be stable. I will go, I think once I think we will continue this lecture, I will talk about what do you mean by stable. When you call it as stable, I think just for the half a minute, I will explain what is the stable means. I think stability is very important, stability or maturity is very important, that you can easily calculate by the how much amount of oxygen is getting uptake by the bacteria or the microbes, and how much is the carbon dioxide is producing while in the degradation process. So, need to be a very stable. If it is not stable, unnecessary it will create problem once you add that same compost into the soil. Under the condition that allow development of thermophilic temperature, this is also one of the very important word, thermophilic temperature. And what do you mean by thermophilic? Thermophilic means the temperature more than 45 degree centigrade. Mesophilic is less than 45 degree, and thermophilic is more than 45 degree centigrade. This is very important word. I think you please remember that when you visit anywhere, any compost plant, ask those people how much amount of temperature, how much degree temperature you are getting in the composting plant. If they have any kind of composting method, you ask the question that how much temperature they are getting while in the degradation process. So, what is written, that there is allowed development of thermophilic temperature. So, and why this temperature will increase? See, this temperature increase because of degradation of organic matter. Okay. Because of that some energy will produce, that energy we can easily calculate or can find by temperature. As a result of biological produced heat, okay, that heat we can measure to produce the final product, that is stable, which I already talked about, is a stable, free of pathogen. See, this is also very important, that stable and free of pathogen. See, any waste you use, whether it is a kitchen waste, after the degradation process there will be lot of pathogens could be possible. And if you are using specially the sewage sludge for the composting process, even the agriculture waste also if you use, there also you will find lot of pathogens, and these pathogens will get reduced by thermophilic temperature. okay, which I am going to discuss further. And that is why if you have visit any compost plant, if you want to take the compost in your hand, just see that, just ask the question, how much is the thermophilic temperature you got it. If they are not able to answer, do not take the compost in your hand, otherwise maybe there will be a lot of pathogens could be possible. Okay. And also the plant seeds, there should not be plant seeds, okay, in the final compost. And many times see some of the locations you will find, okay, this is the compost is put it in some one particular area, you will see some of the plants are growing into that. Means we will see that how best is that compost, that these seeds are growing into that, means that is not the proper compost. It should be free from the plant seeds, okay, that seeds has to be completely get degraded during the composting process and can be beneficially applied to land. This is also one of the very important point, that it should be beneficial to the land, then only we can say is a proper composting process. So, how it will be benefit to the land? By having proper nutrients, and what major nutrients required for the soil? NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. This is the major nutrients are required for the soil as an fertilizer. Okay. So, this is the flow chart. You can see, by that we can understand that by this carbon, nitrogen, this is the organic matter. Okay. So, organic matter, first the proper mixing is required. I will share that what do you mean by this mixing. This mixing is nothing but proper carbon and nitrogen ratio. This is very important for the degradation process. For that you need proper mixing, not only mixing, but even the size is very important for the degradation process. That size also we will be required one special kind of shredder to reduce the size of the particular organic material. And this is the composting, followed by composting process, where the water vapors, heat, carbon dioxide and maybe I think some amount of nitrogen also could be possible to come out from that, those gases, and will be required oxygen for the degradation process. And finally, will be also required curing process. Curing is nothing but is another I think most of the methods do not require the curing process, but I think if you can keep it for another 30 days. So, the final degradation could be possible that, and finally, we will get the compost which will having the humic substances and along with the some microbes in the final compost. This is the complete understanding of the composting process. Okay. And here also you can see that how important is the composting process for the climate change. See, already I discussed about the wet waste is a major problem which is unscientific, is getting disposed into the dump sites or landfill areas, and these organic waste, because it has to be degraded. So, whether you do compost or whether you do not have any kind of treatment process, it will get degraded, and because of that leachate will also get produced and lot of gases will get produced unnecessary. So, this is another flow, you can see that by adding organic material plus oxygen will get few gases, energy and finally compost. See, one more point I want to share here, when somebody will say that there are two type of composting process, maybe some of the textbook also you can find there are two type of composting process, one is aerobic composting, other is anaerobic composting. No, there won't be any anaerobic composting process. See, always remember that when you say composting process is a aerobic degradation process, aerobic process. Okay. And that is why we are always see in the flow also I put it oxygen. Oxygen is always required for the to have the proper aerobic condition process. So, now we will talk about temperature profile. So, compost heat is produced by the byproduct of microbial breakdown of the organic material. This also you can easily understand. I think is difficult to have the proper chemical formula of organic waste, but by simple one formula we can understand how the heat is producing, like C6 H12 and O6. Once it will react with oxygen under with some microbes, it will produce 6 amount of carbon dioxide and 6 amount of H2O plus some kind of energy, and finally we will get some sludge or residue. Now, this is the simple degradation of glucose. So, this is glucose. Once it react with oxygen with the microbes, it will produce carbon dioxide, H2O. This energy we can measure by heat, and this residue is our compost finally. Okay. So, the similar kind of degradation or similar kind of reaction is possible in the composting process. Now, here I said it that it should not be have the anaerobic one. If suppose there will not be any oxygen, it is possible to produce carbon dioxide, obviously it will produce, and also methane will produce. This is odorous gas, and the quantity of this residue now in the aerobic process it will be around 30 to 40%, and for in the anaerobic condition that will be only 5% to 10%, 5 to 10%. So, what is the benefit of having the anaerobic degradation process? There is no benefit of anaerobic condition, and because there is unnecessary these odorous gases are producing, even nitrogen gas also will come out, nitrogen oxides will also produce in the form of ammonia, NH4 in the anaerobic process, okay, NH3 gas. So, the second point is the heat production depend on the size of the composting system, its moisture content, aeration, CN ratio and ambient temperature. This is one of the important points for degradation process. The size of the composting system, maybe size is not that important one, but the moisture content, because why moisture content is important? Because for microbe degradation, the microbes required oxygen, that could be around 60 to 70% moisture content is always required for the degradation process. Aeration, obviously the aeration will be required for the growth of the microbes. Carbon to nitrogen ratio, because now here the carbon is required for the degradation process and nitrogen is required for the to have the more microbes for the degradation process. And finally, ambient temperature, that is also important, that you know that in the ambient temperature, like temperature 30 to 35, the degradation could be very fast. Why? The production of microbes also will very well, and so proper degradation also could be possible. So, this is the temperature profile normally in the composting process. So, it will start from the mesophilic initially, and see here the initially microbes will start to be there, they will be stabilized in the initial condition. So, there will not be much change into the temperature, and followed by it will be a like this kind of log curve will come up where temperature will increase, and finally, and once the degradation will get over and mostly the sugar concentration or easily degradable organic materials will get degrade, and then finally it will get reduced, and finally it comes to the maturation process, that is the curing process, which I showed it in the last slide. And finally, that is why this entire system we can easily shared in the three parts. First the mesophilic temperature, thermophilic temperature, and finally again mesophilic temperature. So, you can see that here this kind of steams, normally this steam is producing because of thermophilic temperature, is a hot composting method. You see here, while the turning of entire material, this turning is required for the aeration process, because entire material should be under the aerobic condition. So, because of that also lot of vapors are coming out. And now here the finally the temperature profile will be initially will be the decomposition and finally will be the composition of entire material. By that way we can understand. Now I think we will talk more on to the temperature one. So, in that one the heat inactivation. So, why it is very important? So, heat inactivation of human, animal, plant pathogens and weed seed is one of the major benefit of thermophilic temperature, which I was talking about in the definition, why it is very important. So, see, whatever the pathogens could be possible, whether is a human pathogens, if you are using the sewage sludge, there are a lot of E. coli will be there and lot of pathogens could be possible, and if you are using the animal waste like even cow dung also, which will have the other kind of pathogens that will get inactivate because of thermophilic temperature. Heat death of a cell means thermal inactivation of its enzyme. Without enzyme activity, a cell cannot function and will die. So, every microbe or bacteria especially will have the enzyme. So, if the enzyme is getting proper death because of heat, and without enzyme any cell or any microbes can't live, okay. It can't function and finally it will die. Pathogens are also destroyed uncontrolled by competition with the other microbes, and there are other benefits also like antibiotic inhibitions could be possible, and even time of survival, this is also very important one. So, I think it is not only the heat inactivation, but also there are few more points where these pathogens can be death in the composting process. But temperature is the only factor that is can measure and control during the temperature. Other parameters is difficult to manage in the composting process, but the temperature is with us. How best we can mix, how best we can aerate the organic matter, so that thermophilic temperature could possible to produce or get allow into that particular mass. So, in US EPA is a US Environmental Protection Agency. I think this is one of the major agency which talk about lot of rules and regulation. So, they recommended the 53 degree centigrade for 5 days, 55 degree for 2 days and 70 degree for 30 minutes is for destruction of pathogens. See, now here you remember that how important is the thermophilic temperature, and why I propose that if you visit any composting plant and you ask the question how much is the temperature thermophilic temperature possible to produce into that particular composting plant, why is very important. So, here this is the our major one. So, organic waste is already shaded, finally is the active composting, and this is the microbes, new microbe population and finally by cell death, this is, and finally will get compost, and by that we can understand the entire composting process. And for that we also require moisture, oxygen and some other process. Okay. Now, here this graph is showing that the thermophilic, same the three different phases of the composting process, mesophilic phase, thermophilic phase and finally again mesophilic phase. Now, here you see that mesophilic phase 10 to 40 degree or 45 degree centigrade, they are majorly the mesophilic bacteria are the major one which are working here for the degradation process. Now, until here, after that this is the thermophilic temperature, okay, this particular where mixed population of thermophilic bacteria, actinomycetes and most heat tolerant fungi. So, this is the major 3 microbes are working, which I am going to talk in the next slides. The bacteria, this is one microbe, actinomycetes another microbe and fungi is another one. So, normally in this particular area the major degradation by the bacteria, and once the temperature is getting reduced, here the actinomycetes will work, the second one, and finally here the fungus will work. Okay. This is the particular, by that temperature profile we can understand and we can see that which are the particular microbes are degrading the organic matter. Now, again few more point onto the heat activations. At high temperature, non-pathogenic organisms survive by forming endospores or thick walled spores that are highly resistant to heat, cold, dryness or lack of food. See, now these questions could be possible, sir, at this very high temperature, like suppose the one particular composting plant is receiving or getting 70-degree temperature in the degradation process. So, pathogens will die. So, what about the other microbes or beneficial microbes which is required for the degradation process? See what it is written here, the non-pathogenic bacteria or those bacteria will form the endospores, or we normally called as a spore forming bacteria. Okay. They will put the one spores properly, and this is highly resistant to heat, cold, dryness. So, they will be non-active, okay, or they will be passive into the that particular area temperature flow. Once the temperature will reduce, those spore forming bacteria which is in the passive condition, which will get active condition. Okay. The same microbes will work for the further degradation process. So, there will not be a negative point or there will not be any problem for the non-pathogenic bacteria. Okay. So, number and types of mesophilic microbes that recolonize compost as it matures depends on what spores and organisms are present in the compost as well in the immediate environment. Okay. After the thermophilic temperature. So, average bacterial population during the composting could be possible 10 to power 6 to 10 to power 12, and fungal population 10 to power 2 to 10 to power 5 by different researcher has found. And also if you are interested, you can read more paper onto that. People have done lot of research, what kind of bacteria, what kind of fungus, how their populations are changing during the composting process. So, you can read further. Now, the functional group of organisms in compost. So, how the functional groups are changing in the composting process? The first, now the organic residue, okay, that any organic residue could be leaves, grass clipping, any plant debris, food scraps, any fecal matter, that sewage sludge also could be possible in the organic residue. First, the degradation by primary consumers. Okay. So, the primary consumers could be what I was talking about, bacteria. The majors are bacteria, actinomycetes and fungus. These are the major microbe, but also along with that there could be a snail, millipedes, snow bugs also could be possible, and also some type of mites also possible there. You can easily find that white small mites also could be possible. Now, after that, once the primary consumers will get degrade, then the secondary consumers will come up. That secondary consumers could be springtails, other some kind of mites also, even nematodes, even protozoa, that is also possible to produce into the composting process. And tertiary consumers followed by secondary consumers could also possible to produce, like centipedes, okay, or these other kind of row beetles also could possible, or some kind of mites also could be possible to produce. So, these are the major organisms during the degradation of organic matter in the composting process. So, here this is the, I think, same thought here. These microbes, I think this is the organic matter is degraded by microbes, and there will be some kind of invertebrate brates also. That is also that I will talk in the next slide. Along with the microbes, there will be a microbe, the smaller size. Invertebrates you can easily find by the in the composting process, and this again these microbes, the death of microbes or dead microbes will be eaten by the invertebrates. Again once it will die, again it will be eaten by the microbes only in the composting process. So, here you can see that the temperature, how the growth of the different temperature ranges, how the growth of microorganism. So, you see here in the 10 degree the lower growth of mesophilic microbes. So, at 10 degree ambient temperature is difficult to get proper degradation process. Once the temperature will rise like 30, 40 upper limit of, like you see here 40 upper limit of growth of mesophilic microbes is possible at this temperature. And if you go here by 70 degree, which I was talking about, spore of bacteria and Actinomycetes remain viable, upper limit of growth of Actinomycetes and more other bacteria. And at 80 degree no negative growth of microorganism, but some extracellular enzyme still active, that is the we required at this high temperature. So, what are the different microbes? Well, the major microbes in the composting process, first is the bacteria, fungus. So, these are the, I think you can see here in the photo some bacteria and fungus, and finally Actinomycetes. Okay. So, again I think you can see here what the even along with the what could be the number of Actinomycetes, 100,000 to 100 millions per gram of compost, the fungus 10,000 to 1 million per gram of compost, even bacteria is the maximum, the 100 million to 1 billion per gram of compost. So, there will be a different kind of microbes are working in the composting process. So, see in the initially also I explained that calling as an composting plant as a mechanical compost plant is very difficult to accept that, because they purely depend upon the microbes. And so, mostly the bacteria you can see what I did, I collected a lot of papers, and from that papers I think many people have worked for isolation of different bacteria, different fungus, different Actinomycetes into the composting process. So, these are the few names of the bacteria, mostly the 80% of task of the degradation is by bacteria. Also major bacteria are the, you can see here, the bacillus kind of bacteria are working for the degradation process. These are the few Actinomycetes, the different Actinomycetes, and these are few fungus or fungi are working in the composting process. And now here this slide is specially for invertebrates, where you can see that there will be a different kind of invertebrates you can see by their size. If you see that size is less than 0.0 mm and this live in the water film in the composting method, very small one, followed by that was the microfauna and mesofauna that live in the air space. Okay, that could be mites, springtails, even the flies also possible to grow in the composting process. And finally, the macrofauna that create space by borrowing into the organic matter or borrowing into the compost material. That could be, see, there will be some kind of earthworm also could be possible to produce, centipedes, snowbugs, millipedes also could possible to grow into the composting process. But I think these kind of invertebrate in the smaller size, it won't possible to produce very easily. If you have a large composting plant and the composting time is more than a 2 months, 60 days, 90 days, then is possible to produce these kind of invertebrates. This is also good to have this kind of invertebrates, so that proper degradation could be possible. These are the few more, they are the different kingdoms of the invertebrates. Okay. If you are interested, you can read more onto this. Now, the phases of composting. Okay. So, already in the temperature flow chart we saw that there will be 3 different phases. mesophilic phase, thermophilic phase and finally maturation phase, that is that we can say is a again mesophilic phase. Or here I put it the 3 different one, 3 pages. The first is the lag phase, where temperature is there will not be any change into the temperature, and if there is a more temperature like a period of exponential growth and accompanying intensification of the activity, that normally we call as a active phase, and finally curing phase or maturation phase, where eventually the tapers into one of the final decline, which continues until the ambient levels are reached, the ambient temperature will reach into the composting mass. So, here this is the lag phase, okay, and this is the active phase and finally maturation phase. Or here you can see that, see when we say the organic matter, we are talking about the organic fractions of the municipal waste, that is kitchen waste, or that is normally is a organic in nature. So, when you say organic in nature, what could be the different components could be possible there? So, it will have either sugar, protein, fat and cellulose and hemicellulose and finally lignin, and this is the sugar, the carbon form, sugar, fat, this is the carbon, protein is nitrogen form. That is why I said it that carbon and nitrogen is important to manage here. Now, here you see that by the temperature flow, so if the temperature is lower, so initially sugar will get degrade, okay, then protein will get degrade, then fat, then cellulose and hemicellulose and lignin in the last. But it is very difficult, these specially the cellulose, hemicellulose and lignin part of organic fraction is very difficult for the degradation process. So, if you are planning to have the degradation or composting of agriculture residue, need to see that how much amount of cellulose or hemicellulose or lignin percentage is there. Or suppose if you are planning to have the composting of water weeds like water hyacinth, Hydrilla verticillata, this is also another kind of weeds or polluted weeds you are finding normally into the reservoirs or in the water. So, they will have the more amount of hemicellulose and lignin percentage, very difficult to degrade, but if you are planning for proper mixing of carbon and nitrogen, so is possible, and proper size, proper moisture content, proper aeration, if possible to maintain in the composting process, is there will be a possibility of degradation of hemicellulose and lignin also within the small period of 20 days or within 30 days period composting process. So, the first is the lag phase. The lag phase begins as soon as composting conditions are established. The microbes begin to proliferate by using sugar, starch and simple cellulose and amino acids present in the raw waste. Okay. And pseudomonas are in the abundance in this phase, while protozoa and fungi are not possible to grow in this particular condition. This phase is very brief and the time is very small here, very brief when putrescible and other kind of waste are involved, otherwise the somewhat longer when woody or MSW waste, woody means I think there more hemicellulose and lignin are there, then that phase could be longer also could be possible, which I think dry leaves, this is also contain large amount of lignin percentage into that. Now, next phase is the active phase, that is the second phase. So, there is a exponential increase in the microbes number and activity manifested by precipitates and uninterrupted rise in the temperature of the composting waste can be observed. So, is a continuous increase, exponential increase of the temperature here. The temperature may peak at 70 degree centigrade or higher, followed by flattening of the temperature curve called the plateau phase. So, I think we are at the particular point the higher temperature, and there I think that particular temperature could be maintained for maybe 2 days, 3 days or 4 days, depend upon the type of organic material that will get stable at this temperature. And the duration of entire active stage, the exponential plus plateau, varies with substrate and with environmental and operational condition. I think every time if you see that always is writing by environmental and operational condition. So, many time is believed that because always we are looking that composting could be possible only onto the proper ambient condition. So, what could be the proper ambient condition? Means no rain and the temperature is 25 degree or 30 degree, but always in the entire year that is not possible to have, because earlier before we were not more know how about the composting process, we believed in those time the composting won't be possible into the rainy season, even in the when the ambient temperature is 10 degree in December, January, the none of the composting plant used to be run in those particular period. But now because we had come up with new composting methods and new technology has been come up, which I am going to talk about in this module, where these local ambient conditions also that won't be more problematic for the composting process. And finally, the maturation or curing phase. When the easily decomposable material is depleted, maturation stage begins, and the proportion of resistant microbes steadily rises and microbe proliferation corresponding decline. In the maturation there will not be availability of food for the microbes. So, obviously, their population also will get reduced. Temperature begins and decline which persists until ambient temperature is reached. The time involved in the maturation is a function of substrate and environmental and operation, again that particular point here that is also important based on the local conditions. So, you can see here I think it is 0 day, I think maybe you will see here the 0 day, what the color you can see, what was the color in the 0 day, and color in 5 days is initially it's become brown, this is converting into black in 8 days. So, that by that way you can understand there are degradations. So, normally the wet waste is green in color, mostly that green color will convert into initially into brown color and finally at the black color, that is showing the degradation process. Here also you can see that this is what the green color, and finally at 10 day is completely black color, which showing the proper degradation process. So, okay, that today we understood that. I think this particular lecture in the initially what I was thinking that you people will understand properly the particular definition, what exactly is the composting process, and without thermophilic temperature and without knowing the microbes, I think is very difficult to understand the composting process. Even when you will talk about the anaerobic degradation process also, there also these kind of things are very important, okay, because it is a biological degradation process. So, many times I think we are constructing very big composting plants without knowing that whether we are allowing the segregated substrate or segregated material into the compost plant, entire mixed waste we are putting for the composting process, knowing that the plastic will not degrade, metals will not degrade, glass will not degrade, but still because we do not have segregation. So, entire waste we are putting into the composting plant, and finally, the entire degraded material we are shedding by the big trommels, which I am going to share here few photographs also. I will show why the India is not successfully running the composting plants, and these composting plants we started long back in 1970, 75, but still we do not have such kind of particular units where we can say this is a successfully running for 10 years, 15 years, one particular composting plant. And you know that there are a lot of benefits of the compost, because already we are getting we know that lot of the negative points onto the chemical fertilizer using for the agriculture area, and obviously this kind of compost is always a alternate of this chemical fertilizer. So, I think we need to know that more onto the composting process. So, once you know the what are the microbes, what are the phases of composting, then I think we will be able to understand the types of composting process based on the phases and thermophilic temperature. So, for today, thank you, and we will meet in the next lecture for different types of composting process. Thank you.